table, Food Access in Richmond. This brown bag is co-sponsored by One Book, One Richmond. So if you haven't had a chance to start reading the stop yet, I would highly recommend you pick up a book, the book recycling program, and read it, but we'll touch on some concepts from that book today. But I'll go ahead and turn it over to Regina, who will be moderating the panel today.
Yeah, so,
can I give you the Texas name for it? So, can I give you this?
We have a panelist struggling to find the room.
yeah, so my name is Regina. I'm a junior here at University of Richmond. During this past summer, I was a food and nutrition fellow, and I was placed in bus farms. So we're all really excited that you guys can come out and listen to Darby and Dominic Barrett talk about food access in Richmond. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we can go on to our discussion.
Hi, everybody. My name is Darby. I give you a little background. I'm an urban planner, and I have been working in food access and food advocacy and policy for a number of years in my private life, and that's what I did my graduate work on that. And then for the past several years, I've worked with the City of Richmond, co-chairing the Mayor's Food Policy Task Force, and now I'm currently work on behalf of the city, part of my time to implement some of the recommendations of the food policy.
I'm supposed to say. I'm Dominic. I'm the Executive Director of Shalom Farms, a nonprofit focused on increasing access to healthy food in urban Richmond. Our farm is in Duron. I think some of you all have been out to the farm. And we focus primarily on some of the areas you'll see in the maps that Dan brought, the east end, the south side, a little bit of the north side. Maybe as the questions come, we can talk a little bit more about our model and the programs that we use in the communities and at the farm. I also work with on the Mayor's Food Policy Task Force and worked under Ann's guidance and a couple other folks on this new Richmond Food Collaborative that we're working on. And on the sort of state level, I sort of like to think about food system stuff. I'm on the Virginia Food System Council Board, which does some of the same stuff that we're trying to do regionally, but on a state level. I think we'll have a wonderful third panelist who my phone is being used to help direct him here as we speak.
All right, perfect. So our first question is, what does food access look like in Richmond?
You start.
Okay, stop you. This is too basic. Raise your hand and tell me fast forward. But for the most part, food access in Richmond is not equitable. There are a lot of factors that influence how people eat, whether it's money, whether it's geographic access to healthy food, whether it's knowledge, knowing about nutrition, knowing how to cook. There are, we will get into the subject of geographic lack of access to healthy food, I think in our next question. But for the most part, it's very unequal in terms of who has access to healthy food. And then Dominic will take this over, but it's not just food; it's the health, people's health that's related to food.
Sure. Yeah, and I think from a geographic standpoint, food access is as interesting and complicated in Richmond as it is anywhere in the country, just because of our history of poor urban planning decisions and other factors that have created isolated pockets. But like you said, I think when I think about food access in Richmond, I think of it in lots of ways, like physical and economic being the two most obvious maybe. But I think there are also broader sort of cultural access issues around, does this food make sense? Can I tell stories with it? Does it speak to me and my own culture? Is it being offered or distributed or grown in a way that makes sense for me, that I feel connected to or feel invited to be a part of that? Does that answer that question?
Yeah, so whenever people talk about the issue of food access, I think a big point that also gets talked about are food deserts. But whenever food deserts do get talked about, there seems to be this conflicting set of ideas as to what exactly is a food desert. So maybe, since you guys do a lot of work in the issue of food access, you guys can talk a little bit more about what food deserts are, how they're really defined, and where they exist in Richmond.
Sure.
Okay, this is something that's an interesting concept. It's a sort of problematic term that's changing. But in a nutshell, it's a simplistic, sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, a way of categorizing the geographic lack of access to food. There are large parts of Richmond, as there are many urban centers. There are rural food deserts too, where people of low income don't have access to healthy food, to grocery stores. And I can really spend more time breaking the concept of food deserts down, and I'm gonna let Dominic take that since it's one of his favorite topics. But I actually use the term food desert a lot because my job is really to speak to policymakers and to government. My job in the city of Richmond is to bring people up to speed, and food desert is a catchy and succinct term, and it's pretty much the only good thing about it. But
yeah, and it is complicated because we do need language to use to understand, in this case, sort of geography, demographics and geography. And I guess my two biggest things I wrestle with, though, like everybody, we end up using the term, is one that it oversimplifies the issue, right? So that we can think, because it then becomes easy for lawmakers walking around. Then it becomes easy for lawmakers to sort of think that the problem is just as simple as this sort of geographic access, right? So there's the one problem with the term, that it just allows us to sort of oversimplify the conversation, although we need ways to oversimplify the conversation, and to the point we need ways to engage lawmakers on policy decisions. But then the other is sort of problematic because it's such a negative term that brings all sorts of stigma with it. And so it then becomes, hey, let's oversimplify the problem and create negative language around it to discuss it and deal with it. And I think that's problematic on a variety of levels, and we could dive into that as we open up the audience. That's something people want to dive into. So we're just sort of talking about what is a food desert to us and what does that mean.
And this is Duron Chavis, and he works with Virginia State University. So if you want to introduce yourself.
My name is Duron Chavis. I work with Virginia State University, also co-coordinator for Richmond, which is a local organization focused on increasing healthy food access and entrepreneurial urban agriculture. For Virginia State University, I basically focus on developing an indoor farm in the municipality in a neighborhood, actually, Park Street. It's like 42% poverty in a little hub. And the goal is to increase healthy food in that area, also nutrition education for the community, as well as a sustainable facility that actually makes money while feeding the community is a nice little balance. So that's kind of my work. Food access, healthy living, and a bunch of other active stuff years before that letter of interest.
And would you guys say that there's a strong food justice movement in Richmond? And if you guys want to also talk about the work that you guys have done.
Sure. Who wants to start? Talk about food justice and what it looks like in Richmond.
Yes, definitely.
Richmond has a strong food justice movement. I think it's in its infancy. I would like to say it's in its infancy. There's been a lot of work done by organizations like Chavis Gardens, medical education, greater nutrition for kids, but they, for the most part, anyway, led to Shalom. Chavis Gardens really was part of there in terms of really getting the conversation really off the ground. But I think it depends on what we talk about when we say food justice. Really, the definitions of that can change depending on who we've had a conversation. For me, in terms of what food justice means, it means not only increasing the amount of healthy food in communities, but also changing the relationships in the community for people who live in those neighborhoods to have control over their food system as well. So that means changing folks from the traditional position of being strictly a consumer to also being a producer, as in they're not just the only ones spending money, they're actually getting money back into their community. So in that vein, if you ask one organization and say, hey, we're bringing healthy food into the community, I said, well, that's not sustainable, that where's all that money going? It's leaving out of the community, it's going to somebody else's pockets. Those folks in that neighborhood, are they being employed by, the production of food or distribution or, consumption or even waste management? At what point along the food system is it creating jobs for those individuals that live inside of those food desert neighborhoods? So, for me, when I talk about justice, I'm also talking about ownership, sovereignty. Are they at the table making the decisions about what they want to see in terms of their food. And so in that sense, there's still a lot of room to grow in Richmond because predominantly the people that live in the neighborhoods are typically not on the boards of these organizations and typically not on the staff of these organizations. Some of the organizations don't even have staff, you know, so or paid staff, like volunteer line. So, and that's unjust, you know, and that's a wealth conversation. That's that goes to the root of the issue of food access being poverty, and you know, those are some very systemic conversations in the city that overlap into some other areas.
I would say that, and that's somewhat true not just in Richmond but across the country, that we have a strong or growing stronger food access community, but not a very strong sort of food justice community. And I think we've got a long way to go on that for some of the very reasons that Duron talked about. And that's not just true of the food movement. I think in general, when it comes to social justice, we're a lot better at charity than we are at justice. And justice models are more complicated, and there's less warm fuzzies involved with them. And you know, I think about the metaphor of, you know, you can either have an ambulance sort of company picking up people who fall down the hill and have injuries and take them to the hospital, or you can build a fence at the top of the mountain. And it's a lot more rewarding, it's a lot easier to stay in business if you're an ambulance company. Once you build the fence, there's not as many warm fuzzies, and it's done, right? And so I think because of that, we've got a long way to go. And I think my organization, among others, are in that sort of gray space where we're often as much a part of the solution as we are a part of the problem, because the models take time and take intentionality to really build in justice into their fabric. If that answers your question.
So you guys talk a lot about solutions, and one of the solutions where the Richmond Food Policy Task Force was formed. So we're very fortunate because all three of our panelists were members of the task force. So maybe if you guys want to talk about the work that you guys did with that, and when it really formed, and why it was really formed, and why it became decided, and what will happen moving forward, I guess. Yeah.
There are a number of different ways I can answer that. So officially, the task force was formed in 2011. The city of Richmond assembled a group of subject matter experts on food access, food access equality, to make recommendations to the administration about how the administration can change policy, can start projects, can fund other projects in order to alleviate food access inequity. We worked pretty hard on a document. Some of the maps will, you don't have to know it. So those maps were part of that document. We did a lot of research. We worked together for about a year and a half and came up with a series of recommendations and a report which we reported to, we presented to the mayor and to his staff. It becomes less simple, I think, after that. And city council is very supportive of this work.
She says as much with what she doesn't say as what she does.
Yeah, so I'm going to say what she can't say. No, sure. After the report was done, it kind of hit this real ambiguous place that, you know, so thankful that Darby was hired as food policy coordinator, which was one of the recommendations that we get a food policy coordinator. They passed the chicken ordinance. And I think, you know, for backyards to have chickens. And then I think the city had already done the community garden piece before the report had came out, so that was one of the things too. And commercial leases was put into a formula that is something that should be done. It should be commercial urban agriculture. But as far as any of the other recommendations, they just kind of hit a wall where I think there was a lot of good energy for the report to come out, and then some other things became more pressing for the city. So, and a lot of, granted, a lot of the recommendations were more things that private institutions or nonprofits would have to take under their umbrella and may come to fruition. But I think that the conversation kind of got stuck.
It did. That's the work that I'm doing. Our recommendation, our budget to do that or any of the other recommendations, which is how I became a part-time food policy coordinator, because the city council, I didn't give you this background, but I work for the region. We do technical assistance for all of our jurisdictions. So we basically are getting part of the work done as a technical assistance project from the region. And in the past year, we found a way to make water more accessible for community gardens by doing a shared water meter. That'll happen soon. We have now $40,000 in the city council budget to hook urban agriculture sites to water, to the municipal water system. And been working with the Parks and Rec Department and the Richmond Redevelopment Housing Authority to find vacant land that is appropriate for the urban agriculture sites. And a number of other things addressing the zoning ordinance to be more conducive to urban agriculture. And one of the things that I work on as well that's related, not necessarily directly in that line, is to increase communication among stakeholders, which is stakeholders meaning that Dominic and Duron was the people that are working on these issues. And so we are working to create a regional food policy council, which we are calling the Richmond Capital Region Food Collaborative. And so that's up and running. We are now on funding for our website. We're working with web designers to make a comprehensive website, and that's
And just to that point, I mean, the task force was, for better or worse, set up to die, right? It was set up to be a finite process to put together a report, and then for something magical to happen with that report. And I think that's a challenge in general. A, finding the difference between, okay, putting together a report and then putting together a body or a system in place that can move stuff forward, which hopefully is what can slowly evolve over time. But it's also a delicate balance that I see both at the local level, but with the Virginia Food System Council as well, because the Dean of Agriculture of Virginia State led a group of a bunch of us putting together this food desert report for the state. Again, it's sort of this document that lives but doesn't have a plan. And so now we're trying to, the council is trying to take it on. And there's this delicate balance, right? Because to have the stakeholders at the table to actually move anything forward, you need to have government, you need to have business, you need to have a bunch of folks who then also have skin in the game, and who also, as a result, are going to have things to say about how pointed you can be in your recommendations and how drastic you can be in your recommendations. And I think it can be somewhat the same dance on the local level. Is you need city council and the mayor's office to play ball, and you need the big players to be at the table. And yet the more that they're at the table driving that discussion, the less totally bold you can probably be when it comes to sort of developing a justice-oriented model. And so I think it's, for me, it's always a delicate balance, because you know you want the can to be moved, or the meter to be moved a little bit, so you want them at the table. You need them, but often you're not going to be able to have this sort of revolutionary proposal if it has to be built within those realities. Does that make any sense to resonate? Okay.
Yeah. Every day.
Yeah, so I've asked a few questions. Does anyone in the audience maybe have any questions for me?
How did you define food deserts on this map?
Are you a map? Are you a data person?
Like,
I live in one neighborhood, so I'm curious.
So the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, defines food desert as a census tract. We're starting with a problematic geography, all right? A census tract that has 20% or higher level of poverty in the tract, and has 500 people or more living 1 mile or more away from a grocery store. So, I mean, a full service Kroger, Martin's, where you can get everything you need. So the way that these were defined, I remapped the US, in fact, Dominic and I worked on this together. The USDA has a food desert mapper that is online, but they just across the board use the same metrics, thank you, and but they use the ACE code, the North American Industrial Classification System codes for grocery stores, which are not always reflective of what food is really offered there. So we redefined the grocery store list, and from experience and having been in the stores, and then did the same geographic selection process. That's why I asked you if you were a data person first. But it was actually a really interesting project, but I did this for the task force report, and we have new census data.
Well, and I think that also brings up another one of the challenges of the return, right? Because A, we do need some sort of, you have to put some data into it to go with the map, right? The map can only show you what you tell it to show. So inevitably there are going to be pockets that we know have huge both economic and physical access challenges to food, where there are low access communities that won't show up. But also, it's going to be too easy, I think, for us to maybe, or for the government to be able to say, okay, that block's not purple anymore because this grocery store is here, because whatever is there, and so now we don't have to worry about it. But conversely, it's also not going to show successes, because a lot of the successes are not going to be, some of them are going to be grocery stores, right? But some of them are going to be mobile markets, some of them are going to be pop-up farm stands, some of them are going to be community gardens. And so this is how we put all of our eggs in this basket and say, this is how we define success around food access. And we're not going to be able to show our successes, or we're going to be able to sort of look past failures because it's no longer purple or blue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not every mapper, GIS mapper, is willing to do what Ann does, which is let's actually get anecdotal evidence here and figure out like what's actually real and what's not real.
Yeah. The other thing too is that I overlay the neighborhoods so it makes more sense. Census tracts won't be able to do that, it's a thing to do with it. So that, and then also that brings up another problem that we didn't talk about with food deserts, is that it's a geographic description. It's a way of describing a problem geographically. But the problem, people attack the idea of food deserts and say, well, it's not actually a geographic issue. People can get to the grocery store. Well, so it also ignores part of the problem, which is education and habit and culture and transportation is huge. Actually, there's a map up here too of GRTC routes and anyway. Yeah.
How do you combat the negative perceptions that some people may have towards low-income residents? So maybe thinking the idea that they choose not to work or that they choose to eat unhealthy.
Well, for me, I think one of the things that I do is point to one, when we talk about welfare or what have you, I point to there's different definitions of low income. Depending on who you ask, low income means black, or when you say welfare, that means black, or urban, that means black. And so a lot of times those definitions are based off people's definite perception. When I say low income, I usually try to approach the conversation that there's a systemic inequities that created poverty in the city of Richmond. And so that poverty is not a situation that's created by persons or people's lack of drive or laziness or what have you. Because it's too many people. I put it in that box and say, if it was one or two people, that were poor or what have you, then we can say, okay, this is anomalous, this is something that they thought they did. When you look at the system and you see 80% of the people are in Richmond, 27% of the people are trapped in poverty or locked inside of these concentrations of poverty. You say, hey, well, this is 1 in 4 people. So if I counted out 1 in 4 people in this room, and 1 in 4 of you all will be poor, right? So that says that there's something symptomatic of failure in the system. So when we talk about low income, we say, hey, there are no jobs, in the city of Richmond. So don't be surprised that people are poor. That's usually the context that I try to frame it in. That low income does not mean lazy, and that welfare is not typically black. So if folks have negative conceptions of it, it's usually bundled in some of their own personal experiences. And I try to get people to think outside of their personal experience and look at the history as to what created poverty inside of Richmond in particular. And we can overlay some of the patterns that happen in Richmond over any major metropolitan city, and it's the same.
Something that you said that resonated with me was achieving justice over charity. And it's a really interesting concept. I just interested in the way that you've been able to try and move that charity model more towards like a productive justice model.
You want me to answer it?
Anyway,
I think about it a lot, in part because I spend a lot of time in churches. And churches are maybe as good of examples of the problems of charity and the strengths of justice, because they run the gamut. And we have a long, in the faith community, a long history of charity that can be beautiful, but can also be really dangerous and problematic. And so I try to be sort of patient and gentle, both with myself, but also with the groups that I'm working with, to say, like, folks have built this framework of belief built in about charity and the value of charity, and it makes it hard to sort of see the problems in those models, and so to look for small successes. But I also think that we need models, particularly when it comes to food, that don't just sort of jump us straight there, because, again, not to overuse metaphors, but the other metaphor around charity and justice that I think about that my mom taught me since I was like 10, which is like a couple at the riverside and they see a baby drowning, and so somebody goes in to save the baby. Is that in the book? Okay, so it's in the book, perfect, right? So you go to the, you guys, at some point you have to say, like, you have to go upstream and find out where the babies are coming from. But what I say is, you can't in good faith ignore the babies that are drowning right in front of you when you think about food, right? We think about the immediate need for food. And so in my head, like, well, how can we, of course, this is still a problematic metaphor, right? Because it's about us helping and saving babies, which is problematic. But ideally, right, we would get in the river and then we would work our way upstream, teaching babies to swim while we get closer to the problem, right? It's not that simple. But with food, there is a real need for immediate, food insecurity, for food insecure families to have food. So there's a place for food banks and food pantries, and a lot of our food still goes to those places, not just to educational programs and empowering programs, because there's an immediate need. So the question becomes, particularly with the immediate need in the charity model, the baby step for me is healthy food, right? So if we're still going to be doing handouts, let's understand sort of systemic problems around creating the need for a food pantry line. And then once we have that conversation, how can we begin to chip away at that system while still doing it? And one of those ways is healthy food, right? Because we know so much of that is bottled into that model where we're keeping people alive on cheap, subsidized, unhealthy food. And so for me, that's a baby step. It's a really long answer to probably not even answering the question, but for me, that's a baby step to move folks along from charity. So let's start by being just in the food that we're distributing and understanding the frameworks that created the problem that we think we're fixing with this food.
Have there been problems with engaging people in terms of like thinking that you're eating healthy food? Because I don't know, it's like I can only imagine there being some friction when you say like the way that you're eating is not right. This is healthy food. This is what you should be eating, and this is how you grow it. I'm sure the entire community responds to that like you're really going to go away.
Right. I'll briefly answer that and then pass it off to them to probably do a better job. But I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and one of the questions I ask every group we start with is like, what is good food to you? Good food is really hard to define, really hard to understand for all of us. And smart people can disagree about what good food is. Like, is butter good or is margarine good? Is meat good or is it not good? And then I sort of expand the conversation to say, if we're spending a lot of time talking about good and bad food, and particularly bad food, and we're saying to a third grader at Woodville Elementary School, this is bad food, and it goes back to a community where the folks who love him and care for him can only or choose only to offer him bad food, we're building in further cycles of shame and not helping anybody. So what I spend a lot of time doing is trying to talk about good food. And for us, good food is food that's good for our bodies, good for our environment, and good for our communities, meaning can we access it, can we share it, is it competent food, is it food we can tell stories with? And sort of say, hey, let's have people fall in love with good food, not hate bad food. And I'm not an expert, I'm a nutritionist who can talk about the ills of bad food, so I would rather spend a lot of time helping people fall in love with good food.
One of the biggest criticisms that occur around community gardens and urban agriculture that usually what has happened, what I've been reading about and what I've been experiencing is that sometimes these community gardens are popped up inside of neighborhoods where the folks that start the gardens are not from those neighborhoods, or the folks that start those farms are not from those neighborhoods, or the folks that bring the food into those neighborhoods are not from those neighborhoods, or they don't have the cultural history or cultural relationships to that community in any way, shape, or form. Other than they want to do something good. So when that happens, they may be bringing bok choy to, give support, and people don't have any familiarity at all with bok choy. I mean, it's healthy, of course, yeah, but can I also do some collard greens? I mean, what's the difference? So the conversation becomes, is it culturally relevant? And are the individuals that are leading these organizations or are part of that drive to help, are they sensitive enough to, be a part of that cultural relevance, or at least be a bridge to cultural relevance inside of their food action or whatever work that they're doing? I mean, because that's applicable to all types of engagement inside of communities. And I think that for a city like Richmond, that's so stratified across lines of race, a lot of times that's that meat and potatoes that people get missing, that they lose. You might be from Oregon Hill, but Oregon Hill has a different, reality than Athens, or Belmont. So there's cultural languages, traditions, just ways of life that are differential. And, when you realize that, hey, I'm not exactly from Athens, I'm not black, I'm not African, I didn't grow up with that experience, but how can I still help, but add into my programmatic efforts something that speaks to the culture specifically of this community, of this neighborhood, of these people, ethnic cuisine, there are ways in which to streamline that conversation and make it applicable. Because everybody has different palates. You might like Thai food, you might, might like Indian cuisine, you might like Greek. They have festivals across the city of Richmond that speak to every particular cultural persuasion, that exists in our social fabric. So why is it that when we start up a community garden, we don't think that, the people that live in this community don't have a specific palate, just like somebody Armenian does. But that's a conversation about race that sometimes we don't like to get into. That there are languages within these communities that's not the same language, but I have a cultural lifestyle that may be differential. And I think when we start to identify the ways in which those cultural lifestyles can be affirmed without saying, hey man, you eat collard greens, that ain't, or put that back, collard greens, that's not what's up. Maybe there's an alternative to cat back, it's just as good, what I'm saying? So finding those ways, methods, and there's a litany of folks that are doing different work to make healthy food, applicable to whatever ethnicity, is had to be spoken of at that time. So I think that's one of the key points that we have to start talking about that. They don't like food. So maybe they don't like to like it. Maybe they don't just like how it tastes. Maybe it could be a different way to prepare it, and that would be the difference between, people not eating it up being like, man, I ain't down with that organic stuff.
To piggyback on that, it's both sort of a challenge, but also sort of, to me, a freeing piece of the puzzle here is because food is so personal, right? So food is as personal as anything there is. And so we do need to be so aware of cultural competency when we're doing this work. And yet for me, that's also freeing because we don't have to sort of dance around the issue and say, oh, well, am I being wrong by suggesting that you might eat something different than I eat? Well, everybody eats something different. We all eat it for a whole host of reasons. And so at least I see that as an opportunity to free up the conversation and say, hey, you eat something different than I eat. Let's figure out why that is, and let's figure out what we have shared as far as our sort of food story might be. And one exercise we do when folks come to the farm is to sort of have people talk about what they had for dinner and kind of pick apart the factors that guide it. Like how many tools did it take to make that? Where did it come from? And then why do you eat that? Why did you start eating Fruit Loops? Why did you start eating pancakes for breakfast? And some people can't, I don't remember the first time I had X, Y, and Z cereals because you were fed it before you had a decision in the matter. To remind us that all of our food choices are somewhat in our control and somewhat out of our control. I think the more we think about, oh wow, I eat quinoa because I was on this blog or I read this magazine, and, it starts to bring to light for us that there are all these complex factors that guide the way we all eat that we feel like we have control over, but we don't. It's all up here sort of telling us what we like and how our palate is formed. I think the more that we can come to that shared understanding of, hey, a lot of the reasons I eat here now are not because I'm smart and a good eater, it's because this is the way I was raised or what I've grown by taste buds and grown to like. I think that creates a more level platform for having that conversation.
This is their realm, not my realm. I live in a 40,000 foot view, but it's my understanding that you asked about pushback, right? I think that both of these organizations are very good about focusing on the positive and not coming in and being preachy. There are organizations that do that. It's something I see a lot, we talk about a lot, but both of these organizations are really good at that.
I think we also had a question.
So it sounds like I'm just so happy that you're so sensitive to like the way that oftentimes like the food justice movement, I think it can be kind of like stigmatizing towards people. But I also have a health emphasis, and I just wonder how you would respond to the following thought experiment. So imagine that we had a basic income and we like totally could in some way solve our city's like best out transportation and zoning policies, such that we had some kind of semblance of economic justice, where everybody really could voluntarily choose to eat what they wanted, would you then still have something to say when people make poor nutritional choices or people were eating really unnutritious food? Would you think that there was, like, do you think that there's an intrinsically like wrong way to make a food decision and that we should be promoting these options even over and above problems of, like, if there's a symptom of economic inequality, then that's like a really bad thing, that like economic inequality is also compromising nutrition. But if it's voluntarily compromising one's nutrition, do you think that that is problematic from the standpoint of justice, independently, setting aside the fact that economic inequality contributes to more nutrition?
I think overall, economic disparity aside, I think our food system as a nation is compromised. It's very distorted. You know, I think that's the line that has to be addressed at that point. If all economic disparity issues were addressed in communities, you're still going to have social meals and hot pockets. You know what I'm saying? So with that reality being said, you also have communities that have lived in these situations where, you know, culinary art skills, cooking and all that type of stuff has been lost. It's not as part of our fabric of, you know, that day to day. You know, the mom's been working there, you know, 8 hours a day, it's a single parent home, what have you. So those, you know, what's quick, what's fast is still a byproduct of our food system and how it's shaped and how the priorities are, you know, driven in terms of industrial agriculture and all that type of stuff, and how we can get food to you as quick as possible and how you can prepare it as quick as possible. And maybe even that added element of, you know, is it addictive? You know, you got some sugar, does it have enough high fructose corn syrup in it? Maybe you want to come back and kids with less back in the car, maybe want a fruit roll up versus, you know, an apple, what have you. So I think that if we dealt with economic disparity issues and all that was fine and good and we lived in that utopia, we would still have to address, well, if we lived in that utopia, I think maybe the food system would fix itself. I mean, it's kind of like one of those, it's an interesting question, but yeah. I think the food system will still grow, essentially. We still have to figure out ways to fix the food system.
For me, when you were first asking the question, I thought, well, for me, the answer would be really simple. I would do this. I think there are other parts of my time and my job. I don't believe it to be, we were talking about being preachy. I think that the playing field needs to be leveled. And for me, I think that there's a fundamental injustice, and that's why I continue to do this work, even though I'm maybe not the best representative at all times for this issue, but on the other hand, Duron was talking about the larger issues. I've been working in food access advocacy for 3 years since the task force started, but for a decade before that, I was a local food advocate because of the environmental issues, and as a regional planner, a lot of what I do is track land use patterns and track loss of farmland and our capacity to feed ourselves in terms of local food. So I think the conversation changes fundamentally, but it's a personal.
And for me, something good question is what you're saying. Should we have opinions about the way people who go to CCB or live in Windsor Farms eat? Right? Like, can we?
Independent of the...
Right, if you could, because it would take, you know, decades and decades and decades to really sort of work out all of the factors that you're talking about. So should we worry about how people in Windsor Farms eat who have complete physical and economic access? And to me, it gets back to Duron's question. You know, I actually was asked to give a speech to the seniors at Lynchburg College about free will and food choice. And to me, that's what's bumping through my head a lot, because there's still a lot of the food system challenges. The food system is still stacked against healthy eating, right? For now, anyway. If we can manufacture a burrito to break at 4.2 pounds per square inch of pressure in our mouth, knowing that that's what our brain really wants, I can't, nor would I want to grow as squash to break at 4.2 pounds of pressure per square inch in your mouth. And yet I do believe in the intrinsic goodness of real food. And so I do believe the more we can level the playing field, the less of a question that will become. But like Ann said, I don't have a whole lot of time or interest in telling anybody how to eat, but certainly not wasting my time on improving the health. That's not like
One of the conversations we have a lot with folks is like, look, man, it's going to come a point in time when food's going to get a little bit more expensive or a lot more expensive, you know, talk about peak oil, whereas now, you know, relatively affordable, but even with the houses happening in California, you know, you go to Chipotle and they actually put $2 in guacamole. So that's a very visceral, like, reality that all of us that love Chipotle understand. But what about what happens when you got to spend an extra $2 for your lettuce, or $3 for your bread, you know, or $4 for your eggs? I mean, that's going to really, you know, all economic disparity aside, that's something that no matter where you live, you know, along that spectrum of, well, you got to pay for food. You know what I'm saying? So everybody has to eat, and I think that, you know, we don't. I'm not preaching to you about, you know, the importance of growing your own food. I'm just saying that at some point in time, it may be a little bit more comfortable for you to have those skills and know exactly, you know, how to produce some level of your own food on a self-sufficient level. And so in that sense, it's going to be important for you to know how to make, you know, a meal with what you grow, you know. And in that reality, that's, you know, if everybody had enough money, you know, I don't think everybody would be really invested in growing their own food all the time. But as it gets more expensive, it just might change. It might change. The dynamics of local food. You know, are we getting our stuff right here in the community? Say, oh, we spending extra dollars to get some strawberries from Argentina in November. You know what I'm saying? So I think that'll shift things. It'll start making us question.
Thank you for saying it.
I think a little bit of her question deals to me, or applies to me, to another one of those systemic problems where people eat healthy. I mean, access is one part of it, but then there's also the content of food and what's put in it to kind of keep people coming back, or measuring, you know, the crunch factor so it's just perfect to appeal to a person, do engineering and things like that. And I think a lot of, like I said, take away the economic aspect, people still choose to be unhealthy. I think that is part of, it is a choice, but I think a lot of that is habit. And what I do, and as you guys know, I work a lot with kids, and I think that working with elementary school kids and training them from the ground up to be able to make these decisions and be able to get the palate that that is going to be receptive to these things that, you know, that they may not get it necessarily at home. You know, we have gardens at the school where kids, you know, they can keep directly out of the gardens. What do you see? Do you see that as a solid, viable way of dealing with this? I know you guys do deal with kids in a variety of different ways, but to me, that's how to really kind of start from the ground up. You guys, how much do you invest in doing that versus going out and doing things as far as, say, maybe, you know, giving people in the community access? But like you said, if they're not used to eating a certain thing, or they don't know how to prepare a certain thing, then they're going to have difficulty integrating that into their diet. So what do you see integrating kids and teaching them the different things?
I see it as super important. CCE says that, you know, if folks participate in the garden program, they're more likely to, you know, eat food that they grow. So I mean, I think it's others, you know, importance. I mean, I got kids, and you know, they have tasted stuff that they would, you know, that they probably wouldn't have tasted, that they probably wouldn't want it. You know what I'm saying? Unless I, you know, that eggplant, you know, I never was a fan until I grew it, you know, myself, and then I grew up this dish from what I. So yeah, I think it's super important for us. But then I say this, you know, there's somebody in a laboratory in Kellogg's that's getting paid $80 to figure out how to keep your kid coming back with cornflakes. So, you know, until we get that kind of budgetary, so we still gonna be kind of like up against David Goliath trying to figure out how to, you know, keep our kids off across the board.
Two parts of your question and your answer. Maybe want to bring up the Regional Food Policy Council that we've been working on. There's been a small group that's been working for a year to try to figure out how to frame the conversation. We're sort of towing the line a little bit. We're sort of getting into the fact that there are sort of three aspects to the food conversation. People are interested in food advocacy. Does that mean you're a local food advocate? Does that mean that you've believe that everyone should have equitable access to food, or that everyone should have emergency food when they're hungry. So we've been trying to figure out how to divide and to bring together this conversation. It's the first time we've ever had a conversation with the local food advocates and the hunger, and the hunger advocates in the same room. And one of the things that we've talked about is how to divide the conversation for the ease of the conversation, while at the same time moving forward our community conversation. So going back to what you're saying, we talked about a fundamental cultural shift, a shift of food culture. And so it really is all of it. It's to the woman that asked the question too about in a different world, if all other things were equitable, the whole culture needs to shift, and the food that is available needs to be better available. I think about it all the time. If I'm, forget my lunch or have to go out, the options aren't great. So it would be nice if everything could shift. Did that answer your question?
And Mike, I think that's such an important question followed up from hers, because my first thought to her question is, okay, at what point, if we're really talking about when do we sort of start blaming or telling people this is right, this is wrong, at what point is that kid old enough, right? At what point do we sort of say, we're no longer going to take into consideration the factors around you and the fact that you've been, for the first 7 years of your life, only eating what you've been given. And when I think about food choice, especially I think about my little brother and big sisters, his options, right, are sort of preordained for him throughout the day. And that includes, the 2 meals he gets at school, it includes the meal he gets at home, it includes the meals he gets on the weekend. And so if he grows up to not make what we would call good food choices, at 18, do we suddenly start saying, okay, now it's your fault, now let's magically give him wealth and economic and physical access? Is it now your total responsibility to make the right choices? And it's complicated. So I think starting with kids are so important. And yet, I don't know the newest research, but I think about there's studies showing that with cigarettes and seatbelts, right? You can start with the kids; they take those behaviors home. Parents will pick up that behavior, and it's a little more complicated. I think the research and the work with food. I think we still want to start and need to start with the kids and say, hey, the more we can expose you to trying raw vegetables, the more likely you're going to like it down the road, the more likely you'll be willing to use it and choose it. And yet, it's not the same thing as just telling mom to put her seatbelt on because you learned that at school. You can't just tell mom, hey, I tried this awesome arugula in the garden at school today, let's have arugula for dinner tonight. And so for me, that's all. We don't do a whole lot of direct school education, but we certainly are part of it. And that's the balance I'm always trying to find, especially with the good and bad question she asked, is we have to build that exposure. We have to get kids excited about food, build palates for food. I also think we have to think like Dorito and Frito-Lay and Altrita, and we need to be as sort of creative and coercive as we can possibly be to trick kids into liking fruits and vegetables. I mean, I talk about ranch as being a gateway drug, and I'm totally okay with that. So we have to do that, and then we also have to realize that, if we expect that behavior to then be able to transfer when they get home, it's not necessarily going to be that, even under the best of circumstances.
Jumping off that point, I know much as a researcher, and catalog you get as much money to get your kids to eat in their cereals. Can you really shift the food culture in the United States in a capitalist system?
Yeah, capitalism will follow what people want. It's going to make money. I mean, I don't think that the capitalist system is necessarily what people decided that they didn't care in the 50s, and that's really what started most of this. At least the changing the way that people ate. I'm like grinning, which doesn't sound like it's something. So I don't think capitalism is the problem per se. I think that when we talk about planning decisions and isolated pockets of poverty, people who don't have choice. I don't want to get into a large economic.
So I think that there's sometimes at the end of the day when I go to sleep, at the end of the day I hate to throw dichotomies out, but sometimes I feel like it's like a day in the life type of thing because we talk about the Atlases on 25th Street, how it used to be a grocery store. But in that conversation, we're like, well, somebody could have in an office somewhere made a decision to say, hey man, instead of, somewhere along the line, somebody in the office said, man, we'll make more money by getting folks in here in the dialysis clinic than, hey, let's put a store where you can get healthy food like it used to be. So, in that sense, I'm saying like, those who have the money, the large corporations, whatever, like, whatever, they could very well have somebody say, but let's invest in a healthy food stock in this area that doesn't have any food in it. But hey, at the end of the day, they say, well, shoot, we'll be servicing the whole church here. There's nobody out here selling food. So how about, we just get on the back end when their kidneys come out. So, so in the capitalistic system, that's how, in my limited understanding, that's how capitalism works. As long as we continue to get money off of it, then it'll create a demand, where a demand does not exist already. So I'm not saying that we, in any way, shape, or form, fashion, that there's going to be a revolutionary change in terms of the economic system that we live under, but I do keep that in cognition. Even when we're dealing with the charitable stuff, we're talking about donations and charitable contributions. I'm thinking to myself like, well, Vita, since you get all this money from people that's on dialysis, maybe you want to give some money to these healthy food access. I mean, I'm thinking like capital. You know what I'm saying? So I think that it feeds off itself. It's a really horrible concept.
I've actually gotten a $1,000 check from that dialysis organization like 2 years ago. It was totally random. They just called up and said, hey, we got money we have to give to the community. And I haven't heard from them since, but yeah, that's a tough one. I won't even try to necessarily answer. I was raised sort of a progressive Catholic, so I'm sort of a socialist and sort of capitalist kind of vein. I do believe that sort of cooperative capitalist models can, over time, get us there. But like she said, this problem, at the very being generous, started in the 50s, maybe even a lot longer than that. That's sort of what I would sort of say. So it took us 60 years of really bad capitalism to get here. It's going to take 60 years of really, really good capitalism to get us there. We know that's not how our system is set up. So it just means we have to work all the harder.
Yeah, so I want to thank you guys again for coming out, and I want to thank the audience too for asking questions. But I'm sure they would love to hear your questions